Hello, my name is Candace Prince. I'm with Green Hope Project. We are a nonprofit that focuses on art, education, and environmentalism. We are so happy that we have our presenter today, Dominic Chacon. He will be addressing an environmental history of the greater Paso del Norte region. And I'm going to turn it over to him. And I'm assuming we'll have a Q&A throughout or at the end, whatever he's comfortable with. Thanks, Dominic.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Candice. And again, thank you so much for putting together this awesome conference of amazing environmentalists and specific to our region and our environment, which sometimes just gets forgotten. So thank you all so much for organizing this. Thank you all for attending and coming here. My name is Dominic Chacon. I am a born and raised El Pasoan. Went to UTEP and studied environmental science with a concentration in biology. But I found myself entering, organizing and activism, mainly because I firmly believe that the two are really connected. So when thinking about a presentation to kind of put together, I really wanted to focus on how I have married those two ideas, at least in my framework and my philosophy. So I wanted to kind of give an environmental history of the greater Paso del Norte region, but specifically doing this through a socio-political lens and understanding not only the environmental reality that we exist in the desert, but also the history of people and society and our interaction with the environment and how that has impacted our environmental reality. So that's my hope of this presentation, is to talk about really important variables in our environment that we should always be thinking of when we are thinking of our future development and future society. And then we're also going to be looking to history to see what are some bad examples of our region interacting with the environment and what could we learn from that. And we will have a little pause in the middle of the presentation for questions, and then we're going to do like a little group exercise, brainstorming exercise, fun and not lecture, because I can talk all day. I can talk all day about this. So the first thing we're going to go to is our environmental context. So we are in an arid landscape, and a lot of times we all accept that we're in the desert, we all accept that, but we don't really understand why. Like, why is El Paso hot and dry? Like, why is it that you drive a few hours elsewhere and you can get into the forest of Cloud Crawford? Also, how does that impact our ecosystem? What makes a desert? And how do we build framework and policy that functions around that reality? And before jumping into it, I just want to emphasize that talk about the environment for the sake of time and for the sake of this presentation, we're really just going to be focusing on air, water, and land. So we're really not going to be talking about flora and fauna, any plants or animals. We're really not going to be talking about too much about the history of people in this region, because that is also really long and extensive. We're really just kind of be focusing on these three variables because they kind of interact the most and are really important for desert ecosystems. So just be aware that some of that stuff is going to be left out. So what makes El Paso hot and dry? Well, the way people measure whether or not something is a desert is something called an aridity index. And it's basically calculated from an equation of how much rain you get and how much evaporation through the sun, through plants that you experience. So there's really hyper-arid deserts, there's arid deserts, semi-arid, and then dry subhumid deserts. El Paso traditionally is more of like a grassland and a semi-arid region, but over the years we have gotten less rain, we had hotter, drier summers, so we've kind of moved up to an arid environment and an arid ecosystem. So that basically just means that we have hot and dry air. And so, but why do we have hot and dry air? So one of the reasons why is a thing called the Hadley cells. And the Hadley cells are a global phenomenon based in like our atmosphere and just, the shape of the earth and really complicated atmospheric currents. So the best way I can kind of explain it is in this little diagram here, this little visual. So you'll see on the equator, obviously, is the hottest place in the globe. You have, really tropical sort of rainforest there. You're going to get a lot of humidity there, and you're also going to experience a lot of evaporation. And so what happens is you have basically the hot, moist air that is evaporating upwards into the atmosphere, and they form rain clouds, and those rain clouds get spread all over the globe. But particularly they get spread in these things called Hadley cells. And these Hadley cells are basically a current within our atmosphere that circulates that warm, moist air up through the atmosphere and then back down at what is around 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south. So that's just a global phenomenon. And that is why we experience cool, dry air descending down to El Paso. So, and that is a global thing. It's been like that for a long time, since the last ice age, actually. And and that's why you'll see all across the globe, you'll see most of the deserts in the world are located somewhere along the 30 degrees north latitude and 30 degrees south. And that's just one of the characteristics that you'll find in deserts. Not all of them. There's some that are above and some that are in between. But for the most part, that is one of the main contributors to deserts all across the world. And that includes the Chihuahuan Desert, which you'll see here. And El Paso is around 33 degrees north. So that's why, one of the reasons why we're a hot, dry place. Another reason we have are what's called the rain shadow effect and continentality. So rain shadow is a little bit easier to understand. And in this visual, you can see you have like a cold airflow. You'll see clouds that accumulate. And then as soon as they get to the mountainous area, the mountains break up that storm clouds. They break up the rain that's happening. And then on the other side of the mountain, you're gonna see what's called a rain shadow. And it's basically the sort of the dryness after the mountains break up the storm and maybe take some of that rain. On the other side of the mountain is going to be a rain shadow. And you can think of this as like the Mojave Desert in the western part of the country, right? You have California, which is nice and lush and mountainous. And then as soon as it gets over those Sierra Nevada mountains, that rain dries out and you have a real expansive desert on the other end. Another example of a rain shadow is the Himalayan mountains, the tallest mountains in the world. The rain shadow of that is the Sahara Desert, which is the largest desert in the world. So that, coupled with the Hadley cells, is one of the reasons why El Paso is an arid place. Another thing is continentality. So in this map, you can kind of see here, this is our region. The green areas are the really high elevation mountainous areas. And those are kind of the mountain ranges that are breaking up the weather for us and causing a rain shadow effect. But another thing is continentality, which means the further you are into a continent and away from the shorelines, you're just going to experience, hotter summers, cooler winters. All the cities that are kind of along a coastline are going to experience relatively little range of temperature through their seasons. But the further you are into a continent, you're going to experience a lot more. So that's another reason why we're an arid region. There's lots of other smaller factors that sort of all work together. And so this is kind of generally speaking, but I think it's really important to understand this because so long as the shape of our Earth doesn't change, so long as these air currents don't devolve and don't stop working, El Paso is going to be a hot and arid place for as long as we can predict. And just like I said earlier, aridity means not only are you hot, but you're also dry. And so those things are also what impact our water resources. So here in El Paso in the Southwest, we have basically three-ish water resources that we use consistently, from residential and commercial uses to agriculture and, really commercial uses. So one of those is going to be obviously the Rio Grande River, which starts in Colorado and is caused by the ice caps on the mountains that sort of melt every year and allow water to go into the Rio Grande. And you can see through this complex river network, it is not a simple river. It has many different little nooks and crevices, and it really serves a drought-stricken region. So the path of the river is not always going to be the same every year. It dries up and meanders and goes elsewhere. Another thing is our aquifers. So we have two aquifers, which are basically underground lakes or underground rivers. And those are where we get most of our water from as a region. We drill down into the water and we drill it up and we use it for most of our residential uses. And yeah, so the whole point of explaining why we're hot and dry is so we can kind of understand how that has shaped our ecosystem here and how that will shape our ecosystem in the future. So the main takeaways are our geographical location ensures that we're going to continue to have hot, dry summers and that we're also going to have dry winters with the potential to freeze. And this is also because we are an elevated desert. So we're a little bit higher off the sea level. So we're going to experience more freezes, and that again changes our ecosystem just a little bit. Another thing that's really important to take away from this is that we have extra salty or saline soil that has basically been created over thousands of years. So if you imagine, if we go back to this river picture, let's say it rains a lot one year and the river comes down here, it's bringing sediment, it's bringing nutrients, and then it reaches a really hot and dry area and it stops flowing. When it stops flowing, then that water is going to be evaporated up and whatever was in that water is going to be left on the ground. So every time it gets evaporated up, we actually have a lot more saline or salt deposits in our soil. And since El Paso, again, has been a desert for so long, this sort of evaporative process has happened for so many thousands of years that it has made our soil very salty. And that impacts, our drinking water, impacts the water that plants can access, it impacts the kinds of plants that grow here. So that's another really important takeaway from understanding the history of desertness in this area. And then because the water is extra salty, we're gonna see extra salty water in our aquifers. And that's another characteristic of a desert. So yeah, so that's just kind of like a real quick and dirty of why we are in a desert, what that means, what we should be thinking about when we talk about our environment in every aspect. The next thing we're going to talk about is the sort of socio-political context. So obviously our nature has been here a long time. Indigenous people have been here a long time, but when did we really start to see a change in our environment? When did we start to see us going from a grassland with, hot and dry seasons to becoming much more arid, much more drier, much more hotter? And what were the factors to that? So again, just kind of focusing on land, water, air. We're not focusing too much on plants and animals, but this is where people start to come involved in our society and sort of alter and kind of degrade our society. So while it is really, before I go on, it's sort of hard to pinpoint any one instance, any one moment in time where humans altered the environment super drastically and super direct. But what we can sort of collect from all these examples is maybe like a common thread. And that's what I hope that we're going to talk about later. But yeah, we'll just dive into it. So when we talk about our land, we sort of automatically assume the 2 nations and 3 states that we live in. But remember that humans and the United States was not always in this region of El Paso, and it wasn't always divided the way it is divided today. That really started happening with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848, which was set to kind of establish new boundaries between the United States and Mexico after the Mexican-American War. So go figure, it was a war and colonization that started to alter our land, started to alter who was considered part of what land, who has access to which land, and things like that. But what's important to know is that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo also created what's called the International Boundary Commission, and it's called the IBC at the time it was created. And this was basically to survey the land, to finalize the boundary, mainly because the United States wanted to develop a railroad and they wanted to make sure the land was good. And so there wasn't too much enforcement on where exactly the border is, when you cross it, and it's not as divided as it is today. It was just sort of mainly general, used to survey the land. But we can already start to see, based on history, that this division, right, starts to create a lot more conflicts, and it starts to create demands for imperialists to continue their enforcement of places. So, for example, there was the San Elizario salt wars that occurred in San Eli, around that region, through people who would use salt flats in the area that basically, like what I said, those pools of lakes that would evaporate and leave a lot of salt there. That was traditionally used by natives to, preserve their food, work on preserving the hides from animals. And so because it was in Texas, and because it's not in Mexico, there you start to see a conflict of resources and people competing for things that they used to have access to all the time. And what's interesting about the San Elizario salt wars, is that there were many disputes, right, for water rights, for land rights, but the salt wars were particularly interesting because they really created the incentive for Fort Bliss to come to El Paso and to settle permanently in El Paso. The Texas Rangers and the military at the time wanted to defend this resource that was now on the American side, and it starts to create this resource struggle that exists. And I don't know how many people are familiar with the militarization of our region, but it has severely impacted our land, not only with the land that is no longer public, but also the land that has been damaged by the military. And I just put an example of Kastner Range in there, because I think that's a really common understanding of how the military has degraded our land here as well. So those are some of like the really, generally speaking, where we start to see our land get degraded, start to be disputed, and start to be fought over, is some of these timelines. When it comes to water, obviously it changes a little bit. So the International and Border or Boundary Commission, which was started after the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, they have to revise it, they have their meetings, and they end up deciding that this boundary commission should also include water management. So the IBC turns into the IBWC, and their task was surface water management for the Rio Grande, and to ensure that any water that's coming to El Paso in the region is going to be split evenly to Mexican citizens, United States citizens, and other people who need that water. And so that's what they had been tasked with doing. And then they became in charge of Elephant Butte Dam. They wanted to establish the dam to better control when the water would get here, how the water could be used, etc. And I found an interesting statistic that today that Elephant Butte is only at 11% capacity. So while it might have been a great strategy to start with, today it's not serving us, it's not serving the needs of the people, and it's really causing more of a water shortage than anything. So that's just the surface water though. So IBWC is the agency that is tasked with monitoring that and enforcing the water rights of the region. When we talk about the aquifers actually have no regulatory agency or oversight required by the federal government. The only thing, or I guess policies and that we need to be mindful of is really coming from the Texas Center for Environmental Quality. And it's not even really a policy or like a limit to your drilling. It's just requires you to do a report on the aquifers that you're draining. The groundwater policy in Texas is dictated by the rule of capture, which is basically saying if you can drill it, you can have it. And if you have the biggest drill to get deeper, then you can get the most water for whatever purpose you want. And so that's just an archaic way of managing water, which is still unfortunately what we have today. The next area is with air, and we can sort of start to see our air being influenced obviously by industrialization and pollution, but we don't really see any attention to air quality until we see the Clean Air Act of 1970, which was established by the Environmental Protection Agency. And since its inception, El Paso has been considered unattainable off and on for ozone, carbon monoxide, and particulate matter since 1970. So since its beginning, we have never really been able to meet those standards. What they do is they say, they kind of change the way to measure the standards. So sometimes they'll be like, oh, El Paso does have decent air quality for today, but then next month it might change differently. So the Texas Commission for Environmental Quality is the agency that is tasked with monitoring air quality and permitting new people who want to add more pollutants, but they're not always the best at that, and some of the policies are very outdated. So, and also when we talk about air quality, historically, the border has been utilized by polluters to absolve themselves from national air standards. And one of the examples we can give is Osarco, right? They had no real enforcement of what they were putting out into the air, mainly because of this international border aspect. They could release the fumes on the day there's like a downward draft, so that way none of the United States citizens have to deal with that, but everybody in Mexico and in Juarez has to deal with that. This is obviously, it's still a problem, has been a problem for a long time, but in 1983, there was an attempt to sort of start establishing an advisory committee between both nations to sort of start working in cohesion. And that advisory committee is still around today, still having meetings. There's actually one next month, I found out. But yeah, and that's basically the status of our air right now, is we're kind of just waiting for somebody to take responsibility for it and somebody to take ownership of it. And the same is true for, you know, our water and our land. Is interesting sort of rereading some of the history on the river and the border and how they kind of came hand in hand. But it really spoke to, for me at least, how much we tried to use the river to enforce our colonization, right? So we tried to say, okay, we need to put a boundary about between Mexico and the United States. So we're going to use the river. We're going to decide that the river is the boundary, not really understanding that the river is a living, breathing thing. It's going to move back and forth. And we're trying to use it as a tool of colonizing, but it really actually just creates more conflicts and creates more limited resources. So that's sort of a quick and dirty of the socio-political context. So what I want you all to kind of understand is that, like, we have environmental stressors naturally in our region, obviously limited water, hot, dry air, sensitive ecosystem, but all that is exacerbated by our socio-political interaction with those said variables, right? We try to channelize the river, we try to build a dam, we try to divide the land up, we try to ignore our air basins that we share and all that stuff. And that all together has sort of put us into the position we are now. How do we go about effectively bringing solutions to our binational community when there's just so many competing agencies, so many competing people on each side, governments that are trying to fight for power and trying to control nature, basically. So when I got to this point in my presentation, I was like, okay, so what's going to be your message, Dominic? What are you saying? You know, like, screw all borders, screw all boundaries. We should only have natural borders or natural boundaries for resources. And the truth is, I wasn't even really sure, but this is something I think a lot of activists and organizers in El Paso have been put up against. These are the things that we have to think about. And this is what shape our organizing. If you were to take maybe a similar situation that we experience in El Paso and apply it to another place that is not a border city, you'll actually find that there's a quicker roadmap to go about bringing change. There's 3 times as less agencies and governing bodies that you have to work through and that you have to build relationships with to get a substantial success, a measurable success. But in El Paso, in our region, it's really, really much more complicated than that. And as you can see from other joint advisory committees and other international boundary commissions that are bringing both nations to the plate, they're still really ineffective. There's not really much that they can do except sort of just discuss the problem more. So when I thought about what we could do to kind of make this much more impactful and engaging and have a lot more takeaways, I thought we could just do a case study, right? We can just, all of us here, brainstorm around a little problem and figure out what barriers exist and why they exist. And maybe it'll sort of help get us thinking differently about the problem and engaging differently with the solutions. So the case study that I chose is going to be Malayuca, which I'll debrief right now, everybody, what that issue is in case you haven't heard of it. But I also wanted to pause for questions because I know that was a mouthful of environmental and socio-political information. Does anybody have any questions or things that didn't make sense or something they wanted to add to that?
No, I just want to say that this is really, really educational. I mean, you should be a college professor, like in a good way. This is really awesome. But, you know, that last comment that you just made about, you know, what do we do with this? Like, where do we go from here? That suggestion about, you know, gathering people together. I mean, who needs to be at the table and how do we make that happen? Like, I mean, clearly you, because you know the information, but who else needs to be there?
Exactly. Precisely. You almost took the presentation out of my mouth next.
No, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Does anybody know? I mean, I think we should make it happen. So.
Definitely. I think in this next case study, we can kind of answer that question a little bit more. We're going to do like a little brainstorming activity. But yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so then this is what we're going to do. We're going to go into a little case study of Samalayuca. So in case you haven't heard of Samalayuca, it's basically 30 miles south of El Paso, 30 to 50 miles south of El Paso. Kind of on the other side of Fort Hancock and San Elizario, around that side, basically on the other side of the border. And right now there's basically a mining threat in Samalayuca. There's a copper mining company from Canada that is trying to basically mine these mountain ranges down here, this one and right here. And they're gonna try to mine it for silver, gold, and copper. But as you can see here, this little sand dune area is what's called the Samalayuca sand dunes and deserts. And it is such an important ecological site. And the reason why is you can see, well, first off, these are the largest sand dunes in our continent. They're the largest ones we have here. And they basically are a recharge site for our underground aquifers. So as you can imagine, if you're on the beach and you pour a bottle of water into the sand is just gonna drink it all up, right? Suck it right in. It's really porous. It's that same sort of idea for our sand dunes. So this sand dune here, when it rains and the water from these mountains goes into these sand dunes, it gulps that water and basically initiates the process for our aquifers that we all use. So if this mine was to happen, this would be a threat to our water. The sand dunes are acting as a recharge site, and basically any pollution that comes from the mining will also go straight to there. It will go directly to the sand dunes and it'll get taken into our water supplies. And not only that, it's going to be a threat to our land. So this mining of copper requires that you destroy the mountain, basically, that you blow up certain parts of it. And yeah, whatever results of that results, wherever the rocks land, they land. But when you destroy these two mountain ranges, any part of it, basically you're exposing this sand dune to a lot more wind and a lot more erosion that otherwise would not happen. And as you all know, El Paso's windy. So for any sand dunes to collect like this, large in this size, it's a really geological phenomenon, and it's something that does not happen often. It's not really found elsewhere in the Chihuahuan Desert. So this is such an important ecological site. And just to keep it as is the only way we can protect it, not even destroying a little bit of the mountain, nothing really. This also would be a threat to our air because it would, again, blow all that fine dust up, and we're already considered unattainable for particulate matter. This would also just be making it worse and putting more stuff into our air and our atmosphere that we do not need. So this is the case study that we're going to be working on. And just remember that it's in Mexico, in Samalayuca, 30 miles from El Paso. So if this was an issue anywhere else, everybody in that vicinity would be considering this issue as their fight, and we should be doing the same. So here's just a little close-up of the dunes and the sort of layout of it. We're going to be doing a little bit of a contrast and comparison to how to build a roadmap. So we're going to be brainstorming on how we would organize to save Samalayuca, right? Think of it as any other issue-based campaign. You want to have a message, you want to identify our shareholders or stakeholders, people who are invested in this, and we want to organize them, right? We want to inform them, mobilize, empower, etc. So how we're going to do that, though, is through different sort of realities, okay? So first, we're going to try to make a roadmap to save Samalayuca under the current apparatus of agencies, of borders, and of regulations, right? So we are going to just list out a few agencies and things like that, and how we would get to work with them. In the second round, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do this under a completely different apparatus, that there are absolutely 0 agencies, there is no border, and there are 0 regulations, right? So we're kind of going to the extremes, and we're going to brainstorm on each one, and we're going to see what we come up with as part of our roadmap. At the end of it, we're going to compare roadmaps, and we're going to see what would have worked, what do we think wouldn't have worked, what are the challenges. And so the roadmap requirements are basically, you're going to have to make a list of all the stakeholders who are involved, right? And this doesn't have to be like a perfect plan. It's literally just brainstorming. So 10 minutes. And then for each stakeholder that we've identified, we're going to try to give 3 reasons why we think they would support saving Samalayuca and why they would not. Okay, so 3 reasons for supporting and 3 reasons that they might. For example, let's say we're talking to some farmers out there. We give 3 reasons why, their livestock might get damaged, their land might change, they would not be able to maybe pass this land on to their children like they did, right? Three reasons why they might be against saving Samalayuca is one, maybe somebody decided to give them a lot of money for their land. Two, maybe they were already struggling to afford what they had, things like that. So that's just an example. And then we're going to kind of throw out some timelines for how long we think it would take to get them onto our plan. So we talk to the farmers, we say, we take this message, we take these points that we want to get across to them. I think in 2 years, we can get all the farmers in the area on board to save Samalayuca. Maybe it's a different agency and we say, you know what, they only meet once a year and we have to convince them only with 2-hour meetings once a year. It might take us 3 to 4 years. So that's just gonna be kind of what we're doing. And we're just gonna play around. There is no right or wrong with this. And then I don't know if you can also see this cute little graphic here. This is from, I found this off of Semeli Aslan's page, which I thought was super informative and kind of talking about what Samalayuca is. So yeah, does anybody have any questions on how we're gonna brainstorm this right now? No? Okay then, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up a Google Doc and then we're just gonna go ahead and start brainstorming and then you all be able to see my screen. And let's see. Okay, so we're gonna do this brainstorming exercise first under the idea that everything is functioning as it has. And I don't think it should be too difficult with this group of people that we have here today, because all of you have worked with some sort of agency in your activism. And so you can probably name out a couple agencies that you think we might have to go through. Just waiting for this. Okay. So stakeholders, scenario A. So we can just go ahead and start shouting out agencies or stakeholders.
No stupid suggestions.
No stupid suggestion.
Okay. How about the EPA?
EPA.
I would think just the citizenry of El Paso.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know how you would gauge them, but like she said, no stupid answers.
Yeah, I think at this point we'd also include the citizens of Juarez, right?
Yes.
What else do y'all think?
The mining company.
Mining company.
The labor unions.
Labor unions. But also, there's a Mexican counterpart to the EPA, which is Sermanat, maybe? Sermanat.
Semana, yes.
There we go.
SEMANAT.
Yes. So we can engage them.
Let's say the farmer one. Can I steal that from you? No.
Farmers and landowners, right?
Landowners, yeah.
Who else?
What about anybody concerned about the wildlife that will be harmed as a result of that? Some of those agencies?
Mm-hmm. Groups concerned with wildlife.
Elected officials,
Mm.
the mayors, state delegates, the governor of Chihuahua.
Local. And then we'll do state officials.
So in particular, if you're saying it's going to be harming the water, wouldn't the water companies probably be relevant to that talk?
Mm-hmm. And we'll do the Paso water utilities, and then whatever water company in Mexico. What else? We also, I mean, this is pretty good.
What do we know, Dominic? One question. What do we know about the community surrounding the proposed site?
We know that they are mostly farmers and ranchers. We know that they have been already approached to sell their land. We know that there are government officials who are working with the mining company to make sure that they have electricity, that they have water, everything they need for mining, and are helping to facilitate the sale of land from the owners.
Do we know if the company is owned by shareholders or is it?
It is a company owned by shareholders in Canada, I believe.
Okay.
So,
What is the name of the company?
actually, I'm not too sure. I can look that up though. It's like one of those like LLC, bunch of different like letters and numbers. So we can do Canadian government,
The Canadians love the environment.
right? You would think that's what they say.
They do, just not theirs. I mean, it's not in their land, that's why.
Exactly. Let's see.
But maybe Canadian environmentalists who might be appalled that their problem is being exported.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to say too, like the company itself, they do copper mining and they think they do it for electric parts and electric utilities and stuff like that. So there's a little intersection between energy development and things like that. But I think this is a good start, right? So then the next part of this is going to be coming up with 3 reasons why the EPA would support saving, and 3 reasons why the EPA would not support saving. 3 reasons why you think citizens of El Paso would support saving, and 3 reasons not. So we can start with the EPA. And what reasons do you all think the EPA would support saving someone? Like, I know it's kind of a, you're like, I don't know. Why would
For
they?
their policy?
Policy?
In their mission?
Mission?
1970, I mean, the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, maybe using some of that policy from that.
Awesome. And now 3 reasons why you think they would not support.
It's a border.
Yeah, that they would not support saving. They would say it's out of our jurisdiction, I would think.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's not an American company.
Mm-hmm. Company, what else?
Just the bureaucracy itself is too hard to do.
Oh, it's my least favorite word to spell.
Mhm.
Okay, that's great. I love it. Okay, what else for number 2, which is citizens of El Paso? Why would the citizens of El Paso want to support this cause?
Because it's going to affect them directly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What else?
It's so close.
Mm-hmm.
So directly affecting the health from potentially contaminating water, but also it could have economic ramifications down the road for cleaning up and scrambling to fix it.
Absolutely.
Good point.
And we got rid of ASARCO, right? So that was It's like,
Mhm.
aren't we done with copper mining?
Right. You would hope. Okay, and what are three reasons that you think El Pasoans would not support?
Money.
Money was it like it would cost too much money to get involved, or?
I would say
Somebody's going to
infrastructure.
benefit from the mine. Somebody
Mhm.
invest in it or something.
Mhm.
And there'll be some discussion of it's going to create more jobs and develop the community better with infrastructure and tax base. There'll be all of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But nothing about the cleanup.
Right. Exactly. Definitely. I would also think that El Pasoans would not want to get involved because they might think that it's far removed from them, so like a false sense of being removed from the problem. And I would also think El Pasoans would not want to get involved if they do not see any agency or any like elected official getting involved, so
Leadership.
yeah, lack of leadership, waiting to respond to, elected officials. Awesome. What about the citizens of Juarez? Why would they support this?
Wouldn't they be all the same, basically? I mean, they have different agencies, but humans are humans, no matter what part of the border they're on. So.
Yeah, they'll be directly impacted, have health, and land impacts.
Some people have families on the other side of the border though, so if they're not concerned about it being El Paso, I mean, that could be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What else can we put here? No, we can move on to. So what are maybe three reasons that citizens of Juarez would not support something like this? And believe it or not, there are people who would not support saving Samalayuca.
I think just in general, I've seen that there's apathy. Like people just, if it's not immediately affecting, food on the table or whatever, then it's just, I don't have time for this.
Sense of hopelessness, right?
Or lack of understanding how everything works. So they're confused. And so they're like, I don't get it. I just don't want to deal with it.
Anything else? Personal connection. I would think also economic pressures. I think kind of like what we see with Duranguito and the push to get people to sell their homes only for them to become decrepit, right, is probably something that they're experiencing in that area too. The economic pressure to get rid of their land or the strain of the environment currently on their land. If they're going through drought and somebody comes along to try to sell their land to a company, they're more likely to bite just based on the strains that they're already going through. Yeah, awesome. So for these next ones, we're going to I'm going to kind of group together some of these agencies, right? So let's talk about let's talk like all about elected officials in one group together, right? What if you're an elected official on either side of the border, what would be some reasons that you would support this? and you would say, yes, I want to save Samalayuca.
You're trying to help your constituents. You're trying to help your community.
Exactly.
You have long-term goals for your community, not just short-sighted
Mm-hmm.
money-making opportunities.
Long-term goals. What about maybe some disingenuous reasons too? You know, sometimes people only support these things for like, for, political theater points or some sort of things like that. It could be they want to support for, optics purposes, right?
Yeah, it might garner you the attention of the Mexican president, who's got a pro-environment party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. Awesome. And what about 3 reasons why they would not support something like this? We just have a conflict of interest, which is pretty common these days. What else would you think an elected official would not support this?
Short-sighted visions of the financial benefit.
Just future development. It's all about development sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That mentioning of job creation is kind of a little carrot as well.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Development and job creations. I would also say like a misunderstanding of the impacts, Elected officials get lied to on the daily too, by whoever.
Interesting that on both sides, the positive and the negative for politicians, there's helping your constituents. It's like, I'm either helping them with jobs or I'm helping them with their health. So
Very true. Yeah. Very true. Awesome. Okay. Let's see what else we got. I'll put EPA and Sermanat here. And let's do the farmers then real quick. Oops. So what are 3 things that you think farmers would support? Why would they support this?
The health of their land.
Mm-hmm. Ability of land, right? It could be, they have, ancestral roots and ties to the land too. Let's see, I would also say if you're a farmer and you support this, you definitely understand the impacts and the importance of the region, right? The sand dunes. And what are 3 reasons that you think they would not? You can do, I wanted to do that.
They're ready to sell. They're ready to move on.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any connection to the land. Yeah.
To be made outweighs connection to land. Perfect. What else? If you're a farmer.
Maybe they're currently struggling, due to climate change and just droughts and things. It's less profitable to be a farmer. And NAFTA too, and all the.
Yeah. It's easier to be manipulated.
Maybe they're desperate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then one more. One other reason why if you're a farmer and you saw Samalayuca happening in the mining company and you just decided that you're against it. I would also say fear of retaliation, maybe. You know, on both sides of the border, we get a lot of pushback for, you know, speaking your mind or fighting against the powers that be. So I think that would definitely be one. Okay, so now let's gonna do scenario B. Okay, this is gonna be where there is no borders. You know, we all feel like, oh, hey, we're gonna go to Samalayuca this weekend for a picnic, and we all just go because it's like the park, right? So we're gonna try to get into that mindset, try to think about that. Who are some of the stakeholders that exist in that world?
Wouldn't you have the same stakeholders?
It would be, but I think we would define them a little differently. So instead of, like, for example, instead of saying citizens of El Paso and citizens of Juarez, we would just say the people of the desert, right? Or people of the people in the Chihuahuan desert who live in Chihuahuan desert. I know it's kind of a hard thing. We live in a world where we're so used to there being a point person to represent a group, but if we had to do this completely grassroots, let's say this was all just one state, right? How would we build power, right? Who would we go to? We can also add maybe here youth, the young people. And we can even expand it to all farmers who use water from the aquifer. What else? Who else would you all think? Just think big in general.
So we're subtracting all agencies from this.
Basically, no agencies, no officials. It's just literally everyday people who would still be impacted by this. But how would we reach them? Who are they, basically?
You still have industry, right?
Mm-hmm. We still have
You still have manufacturing and other people that are using water. So I don't know if you have to go to each one individually because there's no organizational structure. Is that how the situation works?
Yeah, that's definitely.
Well, and I think we left out a stakeholder in the other one, which is like media, right? Whatever it is, like whether it's social or traditional media sources to help get the word out, as well as like schools, which, like, you know, CESI and EPA and Green Hope Project are doing now with curriculums inside the schools locally.
Yes, I love that.
WhatsApp is also a way to communicate with people, apparently.
It's true. It really is. Okay, I like that. I think that's good. We can't get too more specific because we don't have agencies or things like that. So let's try to do the same thing again. Okay, so for people who live in the Chihuahuan Desert, put Chihuahuan Desert humans. What would be 3 reasons why? And I would think just they're going to be the same reasons as the other ones, right? Which is directly impacted, personal connection to land, Economic and health, personal connection to land, and you know, if we didn't have borders, if we didn't have any of that, I would think that Samalayuca would be such a much more recreationally used place, you know? So we can say it's like it's a more commonly used site for recreation, right? Because if we didn't have borders, like I'd be over there all the time. It'd be bobsledding down everywhere. And what about 3 reasons why, even if we didn't have borders, you would still want to have Samalayuca? We could still say the economic benefits, right? That's always going to be so many people's first go-to argument. But what else would y'all think?
Water, recharge the aquifer.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're looking for reasons why you wouldn't support defending Samalayuca if there was no borders.
I mean, is there still money involved?
Yeah, there's so many involved. Yeah, economic benefits.
I would say a road might be built, infrastructure that would help you get to the place or develop on. So I would think more development again. You'd be pro-development.
Awesome. I would also think that, oh no, never mind. Another reason, I guess we can just put like a misunderstanding too of the risks, you know? What about, put that in for people, what about farmers, right? We would definitely have the same go-tos, but we would just be basically expanding the amount of farmers, right? We are speaking to, because we'd be speaking to them about the same things, and they would probably have the same motives, but instead of just speaking to the farmers of Samalayuca who are there at the front line of the injustice, we'd be able to speak to farmers from all over the region who can then get involved and maybe support those farmers, right? So we'll just leave that as is. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then what else do we have? Let's do the industry. How would we go about talking to industries if there was no borders or agencies that we had to go through? What would be some things you think they would get behind to support saving Samalayuca? So like if ASARCO existed still, but not on the border, it was just everywhere, how would we go about talking to ASARCO, and what do you think would be the things that motivate them?
Money.
Money, right?
You got to find a way that it looks good financially.
I think shame sometimes is a powerful tool, and in shaming their purchasers. So it's sort of like the, what was it, blood diamonds, right? So you go after the store that sells the blood diamonds as well as the mining company.
Yes. I would also think that they would support because they can't they can't hide as much as they would like, you know what I mean? Like they would not be able to hide behind the people in Juarez who are getting all the pollution, but can't speak up or can't show up to ASARCO and demand they do better, right? So they have less places to hide, basically, less agencies and governments. And then, of course, we all know they would still support it if it was just about the money. And they would probably support it if they didn't have any regulations to follow, right? So lack of regulations or oversight could allow for more pollution, you know, rampant pollution. And then one more reasons why you think the industry and manufacturing would still support this no matter what, if there was no border, if there was a border. I think they would actually have maybe a little bit more economic influence too, you know, so not only are they going to be making money, but they'd be able to sort of do what they always say of doing, like we're going to leave this city and we're not going to bring our money to this place. And so they kind of have a little bit of leverage to kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Leverage to, you know, just kind of like pull out.
Yeah, relocate to
Yeah,
another
yeah.
area. Yeah.
Without, you know, without notice or anything. Okay, cool. So it's kind of coming together in my head now. Now, the next thing, what did I say I was going to do? Okay, so now we're just gonna be guessing about a timeline. And first of all, I want to thank you all so much for entertaining this little exercise with me. But yeah, so I want you all to think about the list of stakeholders we have, right? Obviously, with the borders and agencies and boundaries drawn, we have a lot more specific populations and specific groups to go be talking to and speaking about and trying to learn what is their mission, what is it that would speak to them, how can we integrate them into this Saving Samalayuca campaign that we're on. So looking at the whole scenario A with the number of stakeholders, some of the reasons we talked about why they would support, why they wouldn't support. If you had to guess in an ideal world that all these people were able to get convinced, were able to reach and speak to, how long do you think this campaign would be? How many years do you think it would take to accomplish this? And it's kind of a hard question, so I'm just gonna call on people, and we're just gonna take a little tally mark, okay, for a timeline guesstimate. And Judy, you want to go first?
You know, we just been at this press conference yesterday for Kasner Range, and my pitch was we've been trying to protect this land for 40 years. So if it took 40 years, guess what? All the minerals will already be extracted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I hope it takes less than 40 years.
I do too. It has to, right? It's either going to take less or something else is going to happen before that. What about, who else do we have? Cito, are you still here?
And I know Cito said he'd be in and out because he's got something going on.
Okay.
I have a plumber over here, which is one of the interesting things about this modern technology that allows us to be in two places at once, when we otherwise would only be in one place. Anyways, I'm sorry. I did hear my name called. What was it?
Just on scenario A, if we had borders, all the stakeholders that we had to talk to, and all the reasons we identified that they might be into it or might not, just ballpark, how many years do you think it would take to successfully talk to these people, align our values?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it just, I guess, depends on capacity. I mean, the big thing is, if we're, if we were the US EPA, for example, or if we had an entity like that really behind it, or, if the President of the United States thought this was a priority, and you had all the power in the world behind you, it might take a year just to organize an event or a scenario like a binational summit or something like that, just to arrange schedules and the format and those kind of things. So, as individuals, touching those entities, it could also take a year. So I guess I would just ballpark, like, it depends on your capacity and how aggressive you are in contacting stakeholders. It would probably take at least a year to contact everyone, and then it would take varying. You would contact them in various modes depending on who you were. So if it was us as a community group, I think we could contact all the stakeholders involved over the course of a year, maybe even 6 months, and then. It also, I guess that's the answer. That's what I think.
Love it. I love your optimism. That's great.
Well, again, it depends on our capacity and how many hours a day we were spending making phone calls, identifying the point of contact.
Yeah, definitely. Capacity is key for sure. All righty. How about Fernanda? Do you want to throw us at a ballpark timeline?
Who is it you called on?
Fernanda? I thought I saw Fernanda.
No.
Sorry, we'll go to Desiree then. If not Desiree, then we can do Sulema. Are you there, Sulema?
I am here.
Awesome. If you had to guess, what would you guess?
Give me the question one more time.
Sure thing. Based on scenario A, of all the people that we've identified that we have to talk to, and all the reasons we think they might support or might not, how long do you think it would take to get all these people on the same page to reach our goal of saving Samalayuca?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that would be, didn't they just mention 40 years or maybe at least one? At least one full year. Somewhere between 1 year and 40 years. That's my summary.
1 to 40. I love it.
Because I have no clue.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. That's a very fair guess. How about Vero?
I think, Tito mentioned capacities. I'm thinking capacity, but also it depends on what is actually happening if there's a permitting process, what it's like, if there's some sort of contest to it, etc. So that might set you on a different timeline. But I think minimum 1 to 10 years is what we've seen, and with something new, maybe less, 1 to 5.
Okay. So we'll do.
With Green Hope on it, it might take maybe 3 months.
Right. At this rate.
No sleep.
Awesome. Okay. And then the
Just
last
sleep
one.
when we die. Sorry.
I love Cito. I'm barely able to organize getting a faucet replaced. To be fair, it is a very complicated faucet.
Awesome. The next one we have is Eileen.
I'm kind of with the last few. It seems like it shouldn't take too long, but as long as you have your capacity going, like projects like this. Now I heard about Project Green and heard about some of these other things that are going on. Collecting people together is a lot easier for a voice. But I would say it's going to at least take a year. I would say hopefully it takes about a year. It would be a great idea, but also just put a year for me.
1 year? No problem. How about you, Candice? What would you guesstimate?
I've been thinking 5 to 10.
5 to 10? 5 to 10. And then I am on the same train. I think it would take about 5 to 10 years. Again, depending on capacity, depending on that stuff. One more time, I don't know if Desiree's there, if you want to give us your feedback. If not, it's okay. Okay. And now we'll do the last one here. Okay, scenario B, same question. Scenario B, we have these people to talk to. It is less specific people and less number, but it is a lot more broad, a lot more generally speaking, right? So that is also takes time into consideration. So again, we'll start with Candice. Again, we'll go back this time. How long do you think under scenario B would it take?
Gosh, without agencies helping and intervening? Yeah. 15 to 40 years, because people are going to keep fighting.
Yes, I love it. You said 15 to 40?
Sure. Yeah, that Kastner range is stuck in my head now.
Yeah, same.
That bothers me.
And how about you, Eileen? What would
Well,
you say?
and because if you could, get people to understand they're actually water is life, is going to be contaminated. To me, it seems like it should take less, but I agree. I think it'll be longer because you'll have to collect more people. You'll have to collect those people, just like we're doing with this project, getting people together to talk about some of the similar topics. So I would say more, I don't know, more than 2.
More than 2? Awesome.
Basically, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm trying.
Nobody does. That's what I learned. That's the lesson of 2020, really. How about for you?
Who'd you call in?
Vero?
Oh, Vero.
How long do you think?
I didn't hear my name. Oh, I don't know. Maybe getting rid of the regulators and elected officials might make things faster.
That's what I was wondering. It could go either way, huh? Or it could be chaos.
Yeah.
Or it could be quicker.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that's really, it's tough for me to imagine that right now, honestly. So I would say, I don't know, maybe a year, maybe faster.
Faster? Okay. 1 year. How about for you, Cito? How long do you think in scenario B with no borders, no agencies, things like that?
Well, I have to apologize and admit that I missed a bunch of it because I didn't quite fully understand until I started hearing other folks' answers. I didn't quite fully understand that. I mean, clearly, without borders or agencies, if things contact would be a lot faster. So I'll just go with the other folks and say a year. Going back to the first question, Veronica raised a really interesting question about. I was just thinking, taking your question at face value, how long it would take to contact a list of stakeholders, right? But of course, it depends on what your asks are, not just your capacity, but then you have to match up your capacity to, as she said, what the asks are and what the processes are. And so the asks would be different at each stage of the process, and the processes would set certain timelines that, regardless of the contact or not, that result in certain possibilities from that contact. So, but clearly things are just in terms of communication, without restrictions or without boundaries of communication, theoretically would be easier. Of course, actually, now that I think about it, it could be the opposite. Without boundaries and parameters, things could be so chaotic that communication might be much more difficult to have. I will say that having gone through a lot of processes, Monica could probably verify this, that communication is much easier for people who are involved in the processes and understand the processes because they know how to communicate, they know with whom to communicate, and they know when to communicate. Whereas for lay people or activists like us, from the outside of those processes, we're just very often lost. Like we communicate with the wrong people at the wrong times, asking the wrong questions, and that makes everything take longer. So, yeah.
Okay. So I'll put you down for a little bit less, or you think it's going to take a little bit longer?
Well, I think I kind of talked myself into maybe a little bit longer counterintuitively because of the boundaries that if you're a professional and you know what you're doing within those boundaries, it facilitates things. But if there are no boundaries and things are more chaotic, in a perfect world, that would make things easier for people. But if everybody's going in directions based on their self-interest, then a lack of boundaries could make things more difficult. So go with longer.
Okay, awesome. And how about for you, Judy? What would you say? Would you think it takes faster, longer, or what?
Okay, so I really think Cito hit it on the head. It has to do with communication. So if you could tell everybody, what do we got in the Metroplex here? It's got to be even bigger than that. We got like 3 million, right? Or maybe more. So simultaneously, if you were able to let everyone know about the situation, and they ask them if they want to protect the land, I would guarantee that it will be done, within an hour or two. How long is it going to take you to explain it to them? And the reason is, I've only been actively working Save Our Mountains for 16 years, and there's no opposition. The people want the land protected, end of story. And if the people with power and money only get one vote to the 3 million people who want it protected, it's going to be protected. You won't need but enough time to explain it to them. I'll give you 24 hours, it'll be plenty of time.
Like that. Yeah, I would say I'm on it's so hard too, because I feel like in scenario A, there's a lot of bureaucracy that I think would hold up the process, but kind of like to Cito's point, if you know which parts of the process could be pressured and could like trip up the whole thing, that's valuable. But also in scenario B, it kind of like, well, who is the ultimate person who makes that decision, right? How do we know we won? But then also in scenario B, you can kind of sort of streamline like as Judy said, like everybody's on the same page, we can streamline this goal to be so much more direct, effective, impactful, and it could be faster. So I'm going to say less than 5 years, which is the last one I said 5 to 10. So I would say 5 years or less. But yeah, okay, great, folks. This is great. I love it. So we only have 5 minutes left, and I was hoping we'd have a little bit more to discuss all this stuff. But basically, the whole point of this brainstorm activity was just to sort of get the ball in our brains moving about what are the alternative ways which we can organize, right? Sometimes we don't realize how much of a moving train we've jumped on in our life, right? Like we are all born onto a moving train called Earth that has its own history and it's going to this trajectory, and we're spending our whole time on the train trying to orientate ourselves and figure out like what the heck's going on, right? And so when that happens, sometimes it's really hard to think outside the box of these things, right? But when sort of revisiting the history of the border and how it interacts with the environment, I was really reminded of how much our environmental issues are directly correlated to our colonization of our area, right? To the militarization of our land, and the sort of bureaucracy that has been built up around that history to sort of be the tools that we have to bring about change. And sometimes those tools can work, right? There are some success stories. Other times they never get heard, right? They never, like Judy said, Castner Range has been going for 40 years and it's still going. So this is just really just to get us thinking about how we as organizers and environmentalists start approaching these political problems, right? It is not a yellow brick road. It is not a simple black and white thing. But if we understand our environmental realities and the things we all need for our Chihuahuan desert ecosystem, and we know a little bit of our history and where we come from, how we ended up here a little bit, we can hopefully navigate around the bureaucracy, use it to our advantage, but also, I think, based like everybody was giving here, I think it was a really powerful thing to know that in scenario B, we were a lot more focused on speaking to the people, right? We were a lot more focused on the educational aspect of the community. We're kind of more thinking about people as a whole, rather than people in this side, people on that side, people up here, people there. And I really think that is a fundamental thing that needs to be more active in our organizing, right? Hence why I named the presentation, The History of the Paso del Norte region, right? Because it's not just about El Paso, it's not just about us and our city, it's about everybody in the region, everybody who drinks water from that aquifer, everybody who's in the air basin, everybody who shares this land and is tied to it. So yeah, so that's what I was hoping. I don't know if anybody had, I hope we got that. I hope we took away a little bit of that. But does anybody have any other comments, questions, concerns, or anything like that?
No, this was really not just informative from the history perspective of it in the environmental, but just even, I like how you did that brainstorming, how you chunk it, how you see multiple perspectives. I think that's something that you can carry with you through anything. And so I think that was really important. You hit that, but, and yeah, I mean, the separation of these invisible lines, when in fact, it's just still, we need to protect the land, we need to protect the people, we need to protect the, the water, we need to protect the animals. And that invisible line, they don't care about that line. Like, it's still a concern at hand. And so I think, thank you so much. Do you guys have any questions for Dominic or comments?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So what are we doing to organize and save Samaluca? Huh?
Right, exactly. That's a great question. Actually, the best way to answer that question is to direct you all to the organization in Juarez or in Samalayuca that is doing some of the outreach. Let me see if I can get it for you. Oh gosh. Why doesn't it zoom? Let me get that for you, y'all, because yeah, this is actually something that it started maybe about a year and a half ago. I don't know, what is time? Maybe it could be 2 years ago, but basically we got word of this with the Sunrise organization in El Paso. We got word of what was happening, and through Mayapan and some of our other connections in Juarez, we were able to kind of just learn about this. We, as environmentalists, we didn't know it all. We don't know every single thing. And sometimes we found that was the thing that we need to break as young organizers, is sort of picking our fights, right? Like this fight, it would naturally, people would tell us that this isn't our fight. You're on this side of the border, you can't really go over, and there's lots of laws against actually crossing national boundaries to go protest or incite protests. There's a lot more risk and there's a lot more things. So we were really confronted with this idea of, how do we become better environmentalists? How do we become better activists and do this? And unfortunately, right now, so we're still in scenario A, and it's still very real. But I think if we start to provoke these ideas and provoke these thoughts, hopefully we can start realizing that these are all of our fights. So the organization that I'm going to direct you to, Sulema, is Frente Ecosocial Paso del Norte. Okay. So they're the ones, I don't know if my screen's still sharing, but they're the ones who created this little cute infographic with the drawings and stuff. And they have some contact information too, Facebook and Gmail. So let me just type
Can you
this.
say that one more time?
Yeah.
Frente Eco Social?
Ecosocial.
Eco.
Yeah. Here, I just put it in the chat there too. It's the name of the organization that is working there. And yeah, and even though, it might not be an easy fight, we can still kind of be doing things that we talked about in scenario B, right? We can still be doing that outreach, talking to those people. It's always important. But yeah, that was all I have for you folks.
And Dominic, I know that you said Sunrise is kind of tackling this right now. How could people get more information or follow you with Sunrise?
Yeah, if you go to sunriseelpaso.org, you'll find our website there. We have all their sort of activities that we're doing. Currently right now, from what I know with Samalayuca, one of the permits got denied. So it's in limbo right now. And so that's part of the benefits of scenario A, right? But it's still, we don't know if it's gonna get the permit or what exactly is holding that permit up. So we haven't really been involved as much, but they are doing a lot of work with Newman 6, which is affecting our air ecosystem and is again one of those binational issues. So you can follow Sunrise and keep up with that.
Great. Thank you so much this was a lot for you to compile, I'm sure, but we appreciate it. And thank you for sharing it. Yeah, what you guys do is important, so we appreciate you. Thank you so much to Dominic Chacon for telling us about the Paso del Norte region, not just El Paso, but this whole area. So thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.